Okay, welcome everyone. Jason here again. We've got our second video now, how to set up a finance strategy. Now, I can't stress to you enough the importance of this video, by far one of the most important videos in the whole series. Because at the end of the day, if you don't understand how the finance works, how are you going to go on to build and grow a large portfolio over time? Often in our workshops, which we conduct every month from around the country, I ask the attendees, put your hand in the air if you've got one property. Leave your hand in the air if you own 2, 3, 4, 5. I can tell you now, most people stop at 1 or 2. The statistics show us that 95% of investors only have 1 or 2 properties. So why don't people own more? I can tell you now, it comes down to finance, it comes down to cash flows, it comes down to debt and your concerns around managing all this and how it impacts your lifestyle. So if you can build a system that manages your debt and your cash flows, a system that means that you don't have to constantly put your own money into your investment portfolio, this will give you the confidence to move forward. Because debt is so important. The way in which you build these portfolios is by going out and borrowing money. So if you're not comfortable with debt, you're going to hit a brick wall. You're going to lose the confidence. All right, so the way in which we explain debt is that there's 3 types of debt. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, the ugly debt is your credit card debt, where you've used the money to buy consumables, TVs, or whatever it might be that are depreciating in value. Then, of course, you could be paying interest rates as high as 20%, and you can't claim back any of those interest repayments. And that costs you so much that you might not even be able to pay the bills because of that. That is the type of debt that you need to avoid. Then, of course, you've got the bad debt. Now, the bad debt is where, for example, you might buy a home. Now, the positive thing is that the home is appreciating in value and the home is on low interest rates. But the problem is you could be paying a fortune in interest repayments on that loan over the life of the loan. So you need to pay that debt down as quickly as possible also. Then, of course, you've got the good debt, the debt that we can't get enough of as investors. And that's where we borrow money from the banks at home loan rates, very low interest rates. We use that money to invest in property that's appreciating in value. We can also claim all the tax deductions on a lot of our expenses. This is how you build wealth. That is the type of debt that I want you to get very comfortable with, and that's the type of debt that you will use to build your portfolio over time. Okay, so now let's have a look at what's in the video. The first thing we're going to focus on is I'm going to teach you a little bit more about your borrowing capacity and how to understand that, how to use a master facility. This is the system of managing all your cash flows and managing the debt. Also some other finance considerations, and also I'll touch on self-managed super funds. The first thing we're going to have a look at is how do banks lend you money? All right, you need to ascertain what is your current borrowing capacity and what will impact that over time. So the way in which the banks work out how much they're going to lend you is they simply look at your income and expenses, among other things, but it's mainly your cash flows. As you can see there, they'll put into a calculator the income that you're generating through your jobs. They'll look at any untaxed income or rental income that you're receiving on your investment properties. They'll also have a look at other expenses like your mortgages, car repayments, personal debt, and of course your credit cards. And yes, unfortunately, your kids cost you something as well. After they put all that information in the calculator, they can then work out how much they plan to lend you. So it's really about your income and expenses in your family that will determine what your borrowing capacity is. So when you have a think about that in terms of borrowing to build your portfolio, what they then do is they also have a look at the income and expenses on the property that you plan to buy. So they'll put the two together, they'll put you and your family together, the property together, and again, that's how much they work out that they will lend you. So let's have a closer look at the types of properties that will impact your borrowing capacity. There's negative cash flow properties. This is where you buy a property where the rental income and the deductions and depreciation, etc., and your tax credits aren't enough to cover all the costs. So you might actually have to contribute funds out of your own pocket, call it $50 a week or more. The other type of property is what we refer to as a neutral cash flow property. This is where the rental income and the tax credits on the property are enough to cover all your costs. So the property pretty much finances its own holding costs. Then, of course, you've got positive cash flow properties. This is where you might buy properties where the rental yields and the tax credits are high enough to cover all the costs, and you're left with some surplus cash at the end of the day, be it $50 or more. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, why don't I just buy cash flow positive properties? Because there is a downside, and that is that generally these properties are in areas where the capital gains aren't as strong, so you need to be mindful of that. So let's have a look at an example of how your borrowing capacity can work against you, but also for you. Here you have a diagram, a table that we've put together that shows you on your left-hand side there how much the banks are prepared to lend you. Across the bottom, that's how many properties that you can buy based on a purchase of around $500,000. The blue strip there actually represents currently what your borrowing capacity is with the bank. So this is what most investors do. They decide they want to invest, they go to the bank to get a pre-approval and they go out and purchase a property, but they don't really understand how their borrowing capacity works. In this example, the investor wanted to buy something local, okay, but unfortunately that property had some negative cash flows attached to it. At the time, the bank was prepared to lend them up to $600,000 and they only needed $500,000. So in that example, they were able to purchase the property. But because now that they've got a property that has negative cash flows on it, they've taken on a liability as far as the banks are concerned, so that next time they go decide to buy a property, their borrowing capacity has now reduced. So you can see there, property number 2, the borrowing capacity is now sitting at $500,000. Now, because they only need to spend $500,000 on their second property, they were able to get the finance through, so they're okay. But what happens a few years later when they're now looking to get their third property? Because the first two had negative cash flows on it, the borrowing capacity is now so low, as you can see it's around 400, that when they go to the bank says, unfortunately, we can't lend to you, all right? And the reason for that is your borrowing capacity is now too low. You just simply don't have enough funds to do it. So the poor investor is thinking to themselves, well, that's unfair, you know, our properties, the ones that we have, actually doing quite well. We're really disappointed the banks won't lend us the money, thinking it's the bank's fault, but it's not. The investor just didn't understand how their borrowing capacity works, and they didn't understand how those types of properties were affecting their borrowing capacity. Okay, so guys, in this example, what we would have explained to the clients is that if you want to buy something that's negative cash flow, your borrowing capacity is currently at around $600,000. It will drop down to around $500,000 when you buy another property. So what that means is that we've got to target something that's cash flow positive, because the cash flow positive income will bring your borrowing capacity back up. So that's what we did. We go out and get something cash flow positive. Now that your borrowing capacity is back up again, now that you can look at properties that are maybe neutrally geared. If the property is neutrally geared, well, your borrowing capacity tends to go more sideways, right? Because it's not costing you money, but it's also not generating positive cash flows. You then might decide to get something that's cash flow positive, which again will bring your borrowing capacity up again, and then that will open up opportunities to again target some negative cash flow positive properties also. So my point being is that you can manipulate your borrowing capacity through the types of properties that you're buying, and that's why it's so important to understand how the finance works, because if you don't, you could end up hitting a brick wall with finance. All right, so the next thing we're going to have a look at now is we're going to have a look at how the master facility works in terms of managing your cash flows, all right? And this is really important. So we understand the borrowing capacity, we understand the types of properties that we need to buy that suit our current circumstances. Now, how do we manage the cash flows? So what we do is we use your equity and your cash. The equity could be an existing home or investment property, along with your cash, and we create what's called a master facility. With that master facility, we then use those funds, which is in a separate account. It's separate to your mortgage and your personal debt. It's purely for investment purposes. And we use the deposits and stamp duties from that facility to buy your investment property. On top of that, all the rental income and tax credits and everything you have can feed back into the master facility, and all your loan repayments and expenses come out. So effectively what we're doing is we're creating a separate structure that manages all the cash flows on your property, so you don't have to constantly put money into that property. And then over time we just replicate it. So you buy property number 2, you pull the deposits and costs out. And then property number 3, again, deposits, costs out, all the rental income is going back in. And then over time, as the properties are increasing in value, you can then pull that equity out, put it into the master facility, and again, use those funds to buy more properties. So that is the best way to manage your portfolio. You'll also always have a buffer in the master facility to keep you sleeping easy at night. So let's have a look at an example how this works on the board. Okay, so let's have a look at how the master facility can provide a solution to your cash flow concerns. So you've created the master facility using some of your cash, or you've released some of the equity for your home. In this example, we've got $200,000. We've started our portfolio targeting a couple of properties that had neutral cash flows on them. We did 90% lends. which means we put in our 10% deposits, we put some funds in for stamp duties and costs. We need approximately, give or take, 80,000. Because we've got 200, we can use these funds to cover the deposits and costs on 2 investment properties. As you can see here, property 1 and property 2, so using $160,000 of the facility with $40,000 left over. Now, because we've got these buffers in place, you don't need to worry about or have concerns if you don't have tenants, because the mortgages, the loan repayments and the interest and everything is coming from the MAS facility. Okay, so if you're between tenancies, don't worry about it. It's normal, it happens all the time. This facility manages it. Remember, you're over here. Your job is to either keep paying off your mortgage if you've got one, or if you're renting, you can hang on to those funds. You can put it in the MAS facility if you want, but you don't have to. This facility or this structure manages its own cash flows. You don't have to worry if you lose your job, because again, the portfolio, the cash flows are run through this MAS facility. Again, you don't have to put funds in. You don't have to worry if the properties drop in value. It doesn't change the cash flows on the property. The banks don't call you up and say, well, look, your property's dropped in value, you need to pay all the money back. That happens with shares if you lend money against shares, not property. Banks know that over time, property is always going to be worth more. So if you have any unforeseen costs, or if you're concerned about interest rate rises, again, it gets absorbed through the MAS facility, but at the same time, if interest rates are higher, we simply adjust the strategy and target properties with higher rental yields to adjust and offset those higher interest rates. So through this structure, again, it allows you to give you the confidence to build a portfolio. It's not impacting your lifestyle, all right? You're not having to put any money into this. You're not having to save or anything. Nothing has to change. Now, over time, as the properties increase in value, you simply take the equity out of the investment properties and move it back into the master facility, which will create more available funds, which then you can go and get property number 3. All right, as you can see there. And again, property number 3 will increase in value and you keep pushing it across, and that's how you grow the portfolio. So this strategy is critical for allowing you to grow a portfolio. It's critical for keeping your portfolio independent of your own personal lifestyle, and it gives you the confidence to grow. So we're going to have a look at a case study very shortly with a client who did this. Over 2.5 years, they bought 6 properties using this strategy. So we'll run through in detail and show you how they did that. So very important. Now, other considerations is, can you do something with your super? So how might that look? Very high level. If you've got super there of approximately 200,000 and you're generating a return of say 6%, that's 12,000 per annum. But if you were to take that super and invest it into an investment property, it's say worth 500,000, and you're still getting a 6%, well, that's 6% on 500 versus 6% on 200. So as you can see there, it's a greater return. Again, it's all about leverage, guys. The other advantage too is once in pension phase, there is no tax on the capital gain or income, and you can have more control over your future with that self-managed super fund. If you want more information on this, you need to go out and speak to your financial planner, but there's some opportunities here as well to leverage. So some of the key outtakes from this video, guys, is that you need to understand your funding capacity, you need to understand how your borrowing capacity works, and how to create those deposits and stamp duty costs, etc., and use that master facility to manage all the cash flows. Use the master facility to manage your cash flows, balance your portfolio by looking at different types of properties in different sorts of locations, and use that multi-purchase strategy. If you make the decision to invest, use the master facility, use your borrowing capacity, and build the portfolio quickly. Okay, so what we're going to have a look at now is a couple of ebooks here for you. I really want you to have a look at this one, the 6 Principles to Financing Your Portfolio. Click on the button there. That's going to teach you a little bit more about how the finance works. And also there's an ebook there on who to work with. It's very important that you work with specialists. I always recommend that you work with a broker, etc., who has experience working with investors so that you get all the structures set up correctly. So make sure you download those ebooks. So the next video coming up is all about creating a property strategy. We're going to learn about all the different property types. We're going to look at how to tailor a plan, and we're going to look at how to identify certain markets and understand how those markets work. Fantastic. Thanks, guys.